Have you ever witnessed a moment so profoundly out of place, it felt like a glitch in the fabric of reality? The kind of moment that shatters your perception of the world, making you question the neat little boxes you put everyone in. Eleanor Vance, the matriarch of a global logistics empire, believed in a world of perfect order, of calculated risks and predictable outcomes. Her life was a fortress built of spreadsheets, board meetings, and the unshakable certainty that she understood the value of everything and everyone. But she was wrong. Terribly, spectacularly wrong. The revelation didn't come from a stock market crash or a corporate espionage plot. It came on a Tuesday night, under the crystal chandeliers of America's most exclusive restaurant, from a 20-year-old waitress with worn-out shoes and frightened eyes. When a calculated act of public humiliation backfired, Eleanor witnessed an impossible feat of memory that defied logic. It was a single thread that, when pulled, unraveled a dark, forgotten story of genius and exploitation, a secret that wouldn't just upend a young woman's life, but would force Eleanor to confront the hollow core of her own perfectly constructed empire. The air in L'Étoile was not merely air, it was a curated atmosphere, a multi-million-dollar blend of recycled oxygen, faint notes of white truffle, and the unspoken scent of generational wealth. It was a place where silence was the most expensive commodity on the menu. Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Global Logistics, breathed it in like a native element. She sat at her customary table. Table 1, a throne of plush velvet overlooking the entire dining room, feeling the familiar thrum of power that was her life's blood. Across from her, her 17-year-old daughter, Lily, was doing a remarkable impression of a wilting flower. She picked at the linen napkin in her lap, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the intricate water crystal pattern on her glass. "Sit up straight, Lily," Eleanor said, her voice a low, polished instrument that never needed to be raised. "Posture is a projection of confidence. You look like you're apologizing for existing." Lily flinched, her spine straightening with a reluctant jerk. "Sorry, Mother. I was just thinking." "Think later. Observe now," Eleanor instructed, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room. "This isn't just dinner. It's a battlefield. See Marcus Thorne over there. Table 6. He just closed the port deal in Singapore. He's pretending not to see us, which means he's acutely aware of our presence. His guest is the Undersecretary of Commerce. Notice how the Undersecretary is leaning in. Thorne is losing him. He's talking too much." To Eleanor, the world was a complex logistics problem, a series of patterns and movements to be analyzed and optimized. People were assets or obstacles, their behaviors data points in a grand equation she was constantly solving. Her daughter, however, remained an unsolvable variable. Lily was bright but crippled by a paralyzing anxiety, a constant state of apology that infuriated Eleanor. She had provided Lily with every advantage, the best schools, the best tutors, a future sculpted from steel and gold, yet the girl remained fragile, porous, a disappointment she tried to hide even from herself. "May I take your order, Madam Vance?" The voice was so quiet, it was almost part of the restaurant's expensive silence. Eleanor looked up. A young woman stood beside their table, her posture ramrod straight, a stark contrast to her daughter's slump. She was new. Eleanor had an eidetic memory for the staff at her preferred establishments. It was a business tool. This girl was not on her roster. She was thin, with a pale, almost translucent complexion, and large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. Her uniform was immaculate, but her black server's shoes were scuffed at the toes, a tiny, discordant detail in the symphony of perfection that was L'Étoile. Her name tag read Ava. "We're waiting for my husband," Eleanor said dismissively, turning her attention back to the battlefield. "Bring a bottle of the 82 Petrus, decant it for 30 minutes, and bring my daughter a sparkling water with a single lime wedge. Not a slice." "Of course, Madame Vance," Ava replied, her voice a murmur. She didn't write anything down. Eleanor noted this with a flicker of annoyance. New staff trying to impress by memory often made mistakes. It was inefficient. Just as Ava turned to leave, a wave of boisterous energy disrupted the room's delicate balance. Marcus Thorne, a man whose ambition was matched only by his lack of subtlety, was approaching their table. He was a corporate predator, a rival who ran his company like a pirate ship to Eleanor's tightly disciplined naval fleet. "Eleanor, a pleasure, as always," he boomed, his voice a full 2 decibels too loud for the room. He gestured to the undersecretary trailing him. "You know John, of course?" "Marcus," Eleanor said, her tone as cool and smooth as the marble floor. "I see you're celebrating the Singapore deal. A bold move. Risky, leveraging that much against projected fuel costs." She had already dissected his strategy and found 3 fatal flaws. Thorne's smile tightened. He hated that she could fillet his victories with a single sentence. His eyes darted around, looking for an angle, a way to reclaim the upper hand. They landed on the young waitress, Ava, who had frozen in place, trying to be invisible. "Ah, a new face at L'Étoile," Thorne exclaimed, turning his full, predatory attention on her. "Let's test the famous 5-star service, shall we?" He grinned, a shark smelling blood. This was his stage now. He was going to put on a show, using this girl as a prop to humiliate Eleanor by proxy, to prove her chosen sanctuary was flawed. "Young lady," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "My party and I have some rather specific tastes. We'll start with the sommelier's private collection. I want a flight of 6 wines. First, a 1995 Screaming Eagle Cabernet. Second, a 2001 Domaine de la Romanée Conti. Third, a 1990 Egon Müller Schatzhofberger Riesling Trockenbeeren Auslese. Fourth, a 1947 Cheval Blanc, and I want to see the ullage before you open it. Fifth, a 1961 Hermitage La Chapelle. And for the 6th, surprise me with something from the Douro Valley, post-2005, with notes of graphite and plum." The undersecretary looked impressed. It was an obnoxious, encyclopedic display of wealth and knowledge. The restaurant's manager, a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Pierre, began to drift over, his face pale. No server could possibly remember that. Thorne wasn't finished. "And for the appetizers to pair with those," he continued, his eyes glinting at Eleanor, "we'll have the seared foie gras with fig reduction for the first 2, the Bellon oysters with a champagne mignonette for the 3rd, the wagyu tartare for the 4th, the roasted bone marrow for the 5th, and for the 6th, you decide, something that complements the Douro. And of course my guest is allergic to walnuts, so ensure there's no cross-contamination." Did you get all that? He had delivered the entire monologue without a pause, a rapid-fire assault designed to be impossible. Jean-Pierre was now at his elbow, ready to intervene, to apologize, to smooth things over. Ava simply stood there, her hands clasped behind her back. Her face was devoid of expression, but her eyes were fixed on Thorne's mouth as he spoke, her focus absolute. "Well?" Thorne prompted with a cruel smirk. Ava blinked once, slowly. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over Thorne's party of 4, then back to him. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice still a whisper, yet it cut through the tension like a razor. She began to recite. "For your party of 4, a 6-wine flight. 1, 1995, Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon. 2, 2001, Domaine de la Romanée Conti. 3, 1999, Egon Müller Schatzhofberger Riesling TBA. 4. 1947, Cheval Blanc, to be presented for Oulage inspection prior to opening. 5. 1961, Paul Jaboulet, Aîné, Hermitage, La Chapelle. 6. A post-2005, Douro Red, with notes of graphite and plum. I would recommend the 2007 Quinta do Vesuvio, which has the profile you desire and is drinking beautifully right now. A stunned silence fell over the three tables. Jean-Pierre's jaw was slack. Thorne's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. Ava continued, her voice a steady, emotionless stream. For the pairings, seared foie gras with fig reduction for the Cabernet and the Romanée Conti. Bellon oysters with champagne mignonette for the Riesling. A5 Wagyu tartare for the Cheval Blanc. Roasted bone marrow with parsley salad for the La Chapelle. For the Quinta do Vesuvio, I would suggest the grilled octopus with smoked paprika, as the char will complement the wine's minerality, and I will personally inform the chef of the severe walnut allergy to prevent any and all cross-contamination. Will that be all, sir? The performance was flawless. It wasn't just recitation, it was comprehension, analysis, and a recommendation. She hadn't just recorded the data, she had processed it. Thorne stared at her, speechless. He looked like he'd been slapped. He managed a weak nod, his grand display of power utterly deflated. He and his guest retreated to their table in a fog of bewildered silence. Eleanor watched the entire exchange, her mind racing. It wasn't normal. It wasn't a party trick. The speed, the accuracy, the layered complexity of the information. It was like watching a standard calculator suddenly solve quantum physics equations. She looked at Ava, really looked at her, for the first time. The girl's face was chalk white, a fine sheen of sweat on her brow. Her hands, now visible, were trembling. This wasn't a skill she enjoyed showing off. It was something that had been dragged out of her. Jean-Pierre, recovering, rushed over to Ava, hissing in a low voice. "How did you do that? You should have called me over. Do not ever do that again." He was terrified of competence he couldn't control. Ava simply nodded, her eyes downcast, and turned to walk toward the kitchen. "Wait," Eleanor's voice cut through the air. It was a command. Ava stopped, her back to the table. "Come here." Slowly the girl turned and walked back, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Look at me," Eleanor said. Ava hesitantly lifted her eyes. They were filled with a profound, hunted fear. "That wasn't a memory trick," Eleanor stated. "That was total recall, eidetic memory." Ava said nothing, just swallowed hard. "I have a project," Eleanor said, her mind already calculating, strategizing. Analyzing shipping routes, optimizing for thousands of variables, weather patterns, geopolitical instability, fuel futures, union disputes. It requires a mind that can see not just the pieces, but the entire board at once. The human brain is the most powerful pattern recognition machine in existence. Yours is exceptional. What they pay you here in a year, I'll pay you in a month. It wasn't a question, it was a transaction. She was acquiring an asset. For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in Ava's eyes. It was a spark of defiance. "I'm a waitress," she said, her voice barely audible. "You are a resource being criminally underutilized," Eleanor countered. "Don't be a fool. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." Lily, who had been watching the entire scene with wide, astonished eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Mother, stop. You're scaring her." Eleanor ignored her. "My card," she said, pulling a heavy black metal card from her purse and placing it on the table. "Call my assistant tomorrow. We'll arrange the contract." Ava looked at the card as if it were a venomous insect. She looked at Eleanor's cold, expectant face. Then she did something that stunned Eleanor more than the feat of memory. She shook her head. "No, thank you," Ava whispered. "I like being a waitress. Please excuse me." She turned and walked away, not to the kitchen, but toward the staff lockers. She was fleeing. Jean-Pierre intercepted her, his face a mask of fury, gesturing wildly. Eleanor sat there, the black card still on the white tablecloth, feeling a sensation she despised, being refused. This wasn't just a waitress turning down a job. This was a puzzle. A priceless asset was actively choosing to be worthless. And Eleanor Vance could not abide an unsolved puzzle, especially one that had just publicly saved her from humiliation and then had the audacity to walk away. "Find out everything about her," she murmured, pulling out her phone and sending a text to a number she kept for just such occasions. The recipient was Frank Miller, a retired detective who now worked as her private investigator. He was expensive, discreet, and ruthlessly thorough. The message was simple. "Ava, waitress at L'Etoile. I want her entire life on my desk by Friday." As she put the phone down, she noticed Lily staring at the spot where Ava had stood, a look of awe on her face. For the first time all evening, her daughter didn't look anxious. She looked inspired. And that, to Eleanor, was the most perplexing data point of all. Frank Miller operated out of a dusty office that smelled of stale coffee and regret, a deliberate anachronism in Eleanor's hyper-modern world. He was a man of paper files and pavement pounding, a relic who believed the truth wasn't found in a search engine, but in the weary faces of people who remembered things. By Thursday evening, he was sitting in Eleanor's sterile, panoramic office on the 50th floor, looking profoundly out of place. "She's a ghost, Eleanor," he said, his gravelly voice a stark contrast to the hushed efficiency of the office. He slid a thin manila folder across her vast obsidian desk. "Ava Adams, age 20. No social media, no credit history, no driver's license. Pays for a room in a boarding house in cash. Works at L'Etoile, under the table. Paid in cash from the service charge pool. According to her W-2, from a diner she worked at before. She doesn't exist before 3 years ago. It's like she fell out of the sky." Eleanor opened the folder. It contained a single grainy printout from a small-town newspaper article dated 12 years prior. The headline read, "Memory Girl Wows Scientists at Institute." The picture showed a small, solemn-looking 8-year-old girl with enormous dark eyes, standing next to a severe-looking man in a lab coat. The girl was identified as Annabelle, a child prodigy with a photographic memory capable of memorizing entire phone books in an hour. The man was Dr. Alistair Finch, a cognitive psychologist and her legal guardian. "Annabelle is Ava," Frank stated. "Facial recognition confirms it. She was a minor celebrity in academic circles, toured universities, demonstrated her gift. Then, around her 10th birthday, she vanished. So did Finch. The trail goes cold. No articles, no follow-ups, nothing." Eleanor stared at the little girl in the photo. The eyes were the same, haunted, ancient. This wasn't just a talent. It was a history someone had tried very hard to erase. "Finch," Eleanor said, the name leaving a bad taste in her mouth. "What about him?" "Even bigger ghost," Frank said. His credentials were from a university that went bankrupt. His institute was a rented office space that closed down overnight. He was a grifter, Eleanor, a smart one. He found a golden goose, and for 2 years he paraded her around. Then he cashed out and disappeared. The pieces clicked into place in Eleanor's mind, the fear in Ava's eyes, the desperate desire for anonymity. Her gift wasn't a source of pride, it was a source of trauma. She wasn't hiding from success, She was hiding from a past where her mind had been a cage, and Dr. Finch held the key. The knowledge shifted something in Eleanor. The initial calculus of acquiring an asset was becoming muddled by a more complex emotion, a cold, protective anger. She hated grifters. She hated men like Thorne and Finch, who used people as pawns. Ava wasn't just an underutilized resource. She was a survivor. Her intercom buzzed. "Madam Vance, your daughter is here to see you." Eleanor frowned. Lily never visited the office. "Send her in." Lily entered, looking small and out of place amidst the towering architecture of corporate power. But her expression wasn't anxious. It was determined. "I found her," Lily said, her voice clear and steady. "I went to the restaurant during the day shift. I waited for her. I talked to her." Eleanor leaned forward. "And?" "She doesn't want your job, Mother," Lily said, a hint of accusation in her tone. "She doesn't want to be a human computer for your company. She just wants to be left alone. She told me that when she has to remember things like that, it's not like thinking. It's like everything else in her brain gets loud. It hurts. She works as a waitress because it's simple. The orders come, she delivers them, and then they're gone. She can forget." The desire to forget. Eleanor understood that. There were parts of her own past, the ruthless climb to the top, that she had sealed away in mental vaults. "She helped me," Lily continued, her cheeks flushing with color. "I was having a panic attack on the street after I left the restaurant. My chest was tight. I couldn't breathe. She found me. She didn't tell me to calm down. She just sat with me. She made me describe the pattern of the bricks on the sidewalk, the exact number of windows on the building across the street, the sequence of colors of the cars passing by. She gave my brain something else to hold on to, a different pattern. It worked." Eleanor stared at her daughter. In the span of 2 days, a waitress had accomplished what a decade of expensive therapists had failed to do. She had given Lily a tool, a way to manage the chaos in her own mind. "She's not a freak, Mom," Lily said, her voice fierce. "She's amazing. And that man at the restaurant, Mr. Thorne? He was a bully. And you were just like him. You saw something you wanted, and you just tried to take it." The words struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. You were just like him. The comparison to the boorish, unsubtle Thorne was insulting, but the unspoken comparison to Finch, that was damning. Before she could formulate a response, her private line rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. On instinct, she answered, putting it on speaker. "Is this Eleanor Vance?" The voice was male, smooth as silk, with an undertone of reptilian coldness. "Who is this?" Eleanor demanded. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch," the voice said, and Eleanor felt the temperature in the room drop. "It has come to my attention that you've taken an interest in a former ward of mine, Annabelle. A gifted child, but a troubled one. I've spent years ensuring her privacy, protecting her from those who would seek to exploit her unique abilities. I trust your intentions are honorable." It was a threat, wrapped in the language of concern. He knew. Frank's digging, Lily's visit, it had stirred the waters, and the monster had surfaced. "Annabelle is no longer your concern," Eleanor said, her voice glacial. "Oh, I think you'll find she is," Finch replied, a chilling amusement in his tone. "You see, before she came into my care, her parents, bless their simple souls, signed a contract, a talent management contract, assigning me lifelong guardianship and a 50% stake in any and all earnings derived from her particular talents. It's quite ironclad. I was merely waiting for her to mature, for her abilities to find a profitable market. It seems you've provided one. So, by all means, hire her. Put her to work, and my lawyers will be in touch to collect my share." He was a parasite, and he had just reattached himself to his host. "If you go anywhere near her," Eleanor began, her voice low and dangerous. "You'll what?" Finch interrupted, his voice hardening. "File a restraining order." "On what grounds?" "I am her legal guardian on paper, the protector of her interests. You are the corporate shark trying to exploit a vulnerable young woman. Who do you think the courts will believe? Stay away from her, Mrs. Vance. She is my investment, and I always protect my investments." The line went dead. Eleanor stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city below. The intricate grid of streets, the flow of traffic. It was a system she understood, a system she could control. But this was different. This was a human equation, messy and unpredictable. Finch had made a fatal error. He had assumed Eleanor Vance was just another predator looking for a score. He hadn't understood that by threatening Ava, by trying to drag her back into the cage of her past, he hadn't just picked a fight with a terrified waitress. He had declared war on Eleanor's entire world. She turned back from the window, her eyes like chips of ice. The puzzle was no longer about acquiring an asset. It was about liberating one. "Lily," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "Get your friend. Tell her to pack a bag. Tell her she's in danger. Frank is going to bring her to the penthouse. She's staying with us." Lily's eyes widened. "You're going to help her?" "Finch thinks this is a legal battle over a contract," Eleanor said, a grim smile touching her lips. "He's about to find out it's a hostile takeover. And I have never, ever lost one of those." The Vance penthouse was less a home and more a museum of minimalist luxury, a silent, sterile expanse of white marble, glass, and muted grey tones. For Ava, who arrived with Frank carrying a single tattered backpack, it felt like stepping onto another planet. She moved through the vast rooms with a hushed, tentative grace, as if afraid the slightest sound might shatter the pristine silence. She refused to make eye contact with Eleanor, focusing instead on the patterns in the marble floor, her lips moving silently as she counted the veins in the stone. Lily became her anchor. She showed Ava to a guest suite that was larger than the entire floor of her boarding house, and sat with her for hours, talking in low tones. Eleanor watched them from a distance, observing this strange, quiet symbiosis. Lily's nervous energy seemed to calm in Ava's preternaturally still presence, while Ava, in turn, seemed to draw a sliver of confidence from Lily's unconditional acceptance. The first move from Finch came 2 days later. A team of lawyers sent a cease and desist letter, followed by a formal notice of intent to sue Vance Global for tortious interference. It was aggressive, designed to intimidate. Eleanor's legal team, a phalanx of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the country, immediately countered with a motion to invalidate the contract on grounds of unconscionability and fraudulent inducement. "It's a strong case, but it's not a slam dunk," her lead counsel, a man named Sterling, advised her over a video call. "The contract was signed by her parents. Finch will claim they were fully aware of what they were doing. He'll paint you as a corporate bully trying to steal his prodigy. It could get messy, public." "I don't care about messy," Eleanor said. "I care about winning. Dig into Finch's past. I want to know every dollar he's ever made, every person he's ever spoken to. Find his skeletons." But Finch was a professional phantom. Frank and the legal team hit a wall of dead ends and shell corporations. He had spent a decade erasing his tracks. The battle was taking its toll on Ava. She grew paler, more withdrawn. She spent most of her time in her room, the door closed. One evening, Eleanor found Lily sitting outside the door, looking worried. "She won't come out," Lily whispered. "She says the noise is bad today. She says she keeps seeing his face, hearing his voice from years ago. It's all replaying in her head." Eleanor felt a surge of cold fury. Finch wasn't just attacking them legally. He was waging a psychological war against Ava, using her own mind as the battlefield. That night, Eleanor made a decision. She knocked on Ava's door. "Ava, it's Eleanor. May I come in?" A long silence, then a faint, "Yes." The room was dark, save for the city lights filtering through the massive window. Ava was sitting on the floor, her back against the glass, looking out at the sprawling, glittering pattern of the metropolis below. "He used to do tests," Ava said without turning around, her voice thin and brittle. "He'd show me a picture of a crowded stadium for 1 second. Then he'd ask me to count the number of people wearing red hats, or he'd have me memorize the serial numbers on $100 bills. He called it exercising the muscle. He said my brain was a gift he had to polish." She hugged her knees to her chest. "But it's not a muscle. It's a recording device. And it never turns off. Everything I see, everything I hear, it's all in here. Forever. Most people's memories are like watercolor paintings. They fade, they blur. Mine are like high-resolution photographs, stacked on top of each other. Millions of them. When I get scared or stressed, the old ones, they come to the front." Eleanor sat down on a chair near the window, not speaking, just listening. "He controlled what I recorded," Ava continued. "He chose the books, the data, the images. He wanted to build a perfect database inside my head, a living encyclopedia he could sell access to. When I started to resist, when I told him it hurt, he got angry. He'd lock me in a room with a television on, flashing random images, just to punish me, to fill my head with noise so I couldn't think. Here it was, the core of the trauma, the reason she craved the simple, forgettable tasks of a waitress. It was an act of rebellion, a way to starve the recording device of meaningful data. "He cannot have you back," Eleanor said, her voice a raw, unfamiliar thing. It was a promise. "This is not a fight about a contract anymore. This is about you, your life." Ava finally turned to look at her. In the dim light, Eleanor could see tears tracking silently down her face. "How can you beat him? He has the law. He has the papers." "The law is a system of patterns and precedents," Eleanor said, her mind beginning to work, to see the shape of the battlefield in a new light. "And Finch is a creature of habit. His greatest strength is his meticulous planning, his control. That is also his greatest weakness. We aren't going to fight him in court. We're going to bring the fight here." She stood up. "We are going to agree to a deposition. With him. Here, in this building, on our territory." Her lawyers were aghast. "It's a trap, Eleanor. He'll use it as a fishing expedition. He'll badger the girl on the record until she breaks." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "He'll expect her to break. He'll expect a frightened, traumatized girl. He'll be prepared for tears and denials. He won't be prepared for the truth, not all of it." The day of the deposition, the penthouse's grand library was converted into a makeshift conference room. A long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine. Lawyers in dark suits murmured in corners. It was a cold, formal, intimidating space. Dr. Alistair Finch arrived precisely on time. He was exactly as Eleanor had imagined, impeccably dressed, handsome in a severe, academic way, with calm, knowing eyes that radiated a chilling sort of paternalistic authority. He moved with an unshakable confidence, the master of his universe. He greeted Eleanor's legal team with a polite, condescending smile. Then he saw Ava. She was sitting at the far end of the table, next to Lily. She was pale but composed, dressed in a simple grey dress. She looked small against the grand backdrop, but she wasn't cowering. She met his gaze for a single, fleeting second before looking down at her hands, folded on the table. "Annabelle," Finch said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "It's good to see you. I've been so worried." The deposition began. Finch's lawyer, a sharp, aggressive woman, led the questioning. For an hour, she built a careful narrative. Finch as the benevolent guardian, the mentor who had discovered a unique talent and nurtured it, protecting a vulnerable child from a world that would exploit her. He had documents for everything: school enrollment forms, medical records, signed affidavits from long-gone neighbors. He was building an impenetrable fortress of paper. Ava's answers were short, quiet monosyllables. "Yes." "No, I don't remember." Finch watched her, a faint, smug smile on his lips. It was all going according to his plan. The girl was a broken, unreliable witness. Then it was Sterling's turn to question Finch. He began by probing the nature of the education Finch had provided. "Dr. Finch, can you describe the curriculum you designed for Annabelle?" "It was a bespoke curriculum," Finch said smoothly. "Tailored to her unique gifts. We focused on memory-intensive subjects: history, languages, advanced mathematics, taxonomy." "And how did you assess her progress?" Sterling asked. "Through regular verbal examinations," Finch replied. Eleanor gave a subtle nod to Sterling. This was the moment. "Ava," Sterling said, turning his attention to her, "do you recall these examinations?" Ava looked up. "Yes." "Could you describe one for us?" Ava took a slow, deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was different. It was no longer the whisper of a frightened waitress. It was clear, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a recording. Tuesday, October 14th, 12 years ago. Time, 3:15 p.m. Location, the study of the house on Elm Street. Weather, overcast, light drizzle. Dr. Finch was wearing a grey tweed jacket with a small coffee stain on the left lapel. He asked me to recite the periodic table backwards, which I did. He then asked me for the full lineage of the Tudor monarchy, including dates of birth, death, and all legitimate and illegitimate issue. I complied. Finch's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat. Ava continued, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. He then said, and I quote, "Very good, Annabelle. You are becoming a perfect little machine, a valuable one. But sentimentality is a virus. We must ensure you remain uninfected." He then showed me a photograph of my parents and asked me to point out the asymmetrical features of their faces. He timed my response with a silver stopwatch. The room was silent. Finch's lawyer stood up. "Objection. This is irrelevant. Anecdotal." "Let her speak," Finch said, his voice tight. He was trying to maintain control. "Ava," Sterling said gently, "do you remember the day you signed the contract amendment, the one granting Dr. Finch lifelong guardianship?" "There was no contract amendment," Ava said. Finch laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Annabelle, your memory is failing you. We have the document right here, signed by you, a clear, childish signature." He gestured to a document on the table. "I did not sign that document," Ava said, her voice unwavering. "On that day, May 22nd, 10 years ago, Dr. Finch told me I was signing a permission slip for a school field trip to the Natural History Museum. He said, verbatim, 'Just sign here, my dear. It's so you can see the dinosaurs. You love the dinosaurs, don't you?' I remember the pen he gave me was a blue Bic. It was running out of ink on the downstroke. She looked directly at Finch, her dark eyes pinning him in place. I also remember that 2 weeks later, on June 5th, you had a phone call with your lawyer. You were in your study. The door was ajar. I was in the hallway, arranging a shelf of geological encyclopedias in alphabetical and chromatic order, a task you had assigned me. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco you favored. Virginia Flake, in a tin you kept in the top right-hand drawer of your desk. You said, "The little fool bought it completely. The dinosaur trick worked." She'd sign her own death warrant for a look at a T-Rex skeleton. You then laughed. The laugh was a sharp, staccato burst of air. It lasted 2.8 seconds and peaked at a frequency of approximately 440 hertz. It was the same sound you made when you successfully completed the Sunday crossword. The deposition room, already silent, seemed to fall into a vacuum. The hum of the building's climate control, the distant city traffic, the very sound of breathing, it all ceased to exist, sucked into the void created by Ava's words. She was not merely recalling a conversation, she was reconstructing a moment in time with terrifying, holographic clarity, painting it onto the minds of everyone present. Dr. Alistair Finch's face, once a mask of composed, paternalistic authority, had crumbled. It was a slow-motion collapse, from confidence to tension, then to a waxy, ashen pallor. He stared at her, his mouth hanging slightly open, his eyes wide with a horror that was not of being caught, but of being seen. Truly, completely seen, stripped bare by a past he thought he alone owned and controlled. This was not a memory. It was an accusation from a ghost, speaking his own damned words back to him. This was Ava's power, fully and finally unleashed. It was not the party trick of a savant, not the analytical engine of a human computer. It was the immutable, incorruptible power of truth. Her mind was not a database of abstract facts. It was a perfect, indelible record of lived experience, a witness that could neither be bribed nor intimidated, nor confused on the stand. "Lies," he finally managed to rasp, the word catching in his throat. He looked desperately at his lawyer, then at the impassive faces around the table. She's broken, a malfunctioning machine. She's inventing fantasies, parroting things she's read, heard. Is she? Eleanor's voice sliced through the tension, cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. She did not raise it. She did not need to. She spoke for the first time since the deposition began, and her words carried the weight of an executioner's judgment. Because my internal security division, which you so carelessly underestimated, began a comprehensive electronic surveillance protocol the moment your first threatening email was sent. Dr. Finch. We have a recording of a call you made 2 days ago to an offshore financial associate. In it, you boasted about the beautifully ironclad nature of your long-term investment and the stroke of genius it took to secure it from a gullible, dinosaur-obsessed child. Your words, not hers. She reached into her briefcase and retrieved a small, slate-grey digital audio recorder. She did not slide it across the table with a flourish. She placed it down in front of her, with the quiet finality of a gravestone being set. Checkmate. Finch's eyes darted from Ava's calm, unblinking face to the small electronic device. The fortress of paper, of legal precedent and carefully fabricated history he had spent a decade building had been vaporized. It was annihilated not by a superior legal argument, but by the one variable he had cultivated yet never truly understood. The perfect, pristine truth, recorded and now replayed with devastating fidelity. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping back with a violent screech that tore through the silence. His breath came in ragged gasps. "You cannot! This is illegal! You—" He pointed a trembling finger at Ava. "You were my creation, a beautiful, perfect machine. I built you." "You built a cage," Ava said, her voice still level, but for the first time, a tremor of profound, ancient sorrow ran through it. "And you forgot that I was the one who remembered how to open the lock." That was the final blow. It wasn't the legal threat or the public humiliation that broke him. It was the loss of control, the final, undeniable proof that the mind he sought to colonize had achieved its own sovereignty. A strangled sound escaped his lips, a pathetic whimper of rage and defeat. Without another word, he turned and practically fled the room, a man not just defeated, but fundamentally erased, his own history turned against him. His lawyer, pale and stunned, gathered her papers in a flustered heap and hurried after him, leaving the heavy silence to settle once more. The war was over. In the quiet aftermath, Ava remained perfectly still for a long moment. Then, a single, shuddering breath escaped her lips, the first uncontrolled exhalation she had taken in hours. The rigid composure dissolved, and she slumped forward, her body trembling as if from a prolonged, high-voltage shock. The act of unlocking those memories, of marching back into the most traumatic moments of her life, and reporting from the front lines, had taken a brutal toll. Lily was instantly at her side, wrapping an arm around her, not speaking, just offering a solid, grounding presence. Eleanor watched them, a feeling washing over her that she couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't the clean, triumphant thrill of a corporate victory. That was a feeling of acquisition, of dominance. This was different. It was starker, more profound. It was the feeling of justice, but a justice so absolute it was almost terrifying to witness. She looked at Ava, who was now leaning against Lily, her eyes closed, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. They were not tears of fear or even relief, but of sheer, soul-deep exhaustion. For the first time, Eleanor didn't see an asset, a puzzle, or even a survivor. She saw a weapon that had just been fired, and the recoil was shaking her to her very foundations. And Eleanor knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her perfectly calculated world had just been irrevocably fractured. The legal fallout was a mere formality, an epilogue written in the driest of prose. Finch disappeared, his lawyers, facing irrefutable evidence of fraud, coercion, and a litany of other charges Eleanor's team had unearthed, formally withdrew all claims. The contract was not just nullified, it was expunged, declared void ab initio, as if the ink that signed it had never touched the page. Finch became a ghost, but this time he was not the predator in the shadows. He was the one being haunted, pursued by the perfect spectre of his own crimes. For Ava, victory was not a sunrise, but the beginning of a long, twilight convalescence. The deposition had been a necessary exorcism, but it had left the house of her mind in disarray. The memories she had so carefully walled off were now free, roaming the corridors of her consciousness. A scent, a sound, a pattern of light on the floor could trigger what she began to call a cascade, an involuntary, high-fidelity replay of a moment from her past with Finch. One afternoon, the smell of Lily's turpentine from a small painting she was working on sent Ava crumpling to the floor, trapped in the memory of the chemical odor of the cleaning fluid Finch used in his laboratory. She would sit for hours, her body rigid, her eyes unfocused, her lips sometimes moving as she silently recited the data stream pouring through her brain. It was during these episodes that Lily's role transformed. She was no longer just a friend. She became an anchor. Remembering what Ava had done for her on the street, Lily would sit beside her, not with panicked pleas to snap out of it, but with a quiet, patient litany of the present. "Ava," she would whisper, taking her hand. "Feel the weave of this blanket. It's cashmere. There are 412 threads per square inch. The color is slate gray. The light is coming from the west window. It's 4:32 p.m. Outside, a car horn is honking in the key of F sharp." She gave Ava's mind a new set of data to process, a lifeline of present-tense facts to pull her from the drowning depths of the past. Slowly, painstakingly, Ava learned to use these anchors herself, to build a new kind of mental architecture, not walls to keep memories out, but pillars of present-moment awareness to ground herself within the storm. Eleanor watched all of this from a careful distance. The strategist in her was silenced, replaced by a stunned observer. She saw in Finch's methods a grotesque parody of her own life's philosophy, the quantification of all things, the optimization of a resource, the elimination of sentimental inefficiencies. The thought that she had looked at Ava in L'Etoile and seen a tool to be acquired now filled her with a profound, corrosive shame. It was one thing to be a shark in a sea of sharks. It was another to realize you were using the same tactics as a monster. This quiet internal crisis manifested as a new kind of patience. The woman who lived by the clock began to understand the value of unmeasured time. She cleared her schedule, delegating with a ruthlessness she usually reserved for hostile negotiations. She began to simply be present in the penthouse, reading a financial report in the same room where Lily was sketching, and Ava was quietly folding a piece of paper into 1,000 intricate creases. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was a space for healing. About a month after the deposition, Eleanor found Ava in the library at 3 in the morning. The girl wasn't sleeping. She was standing before a vast, empty wall, her hands tracing invisible patterns in the air. "The data has to go somewhere," Ava said, her voice a low murmur in the darkness. "When I keep it inside, it gets loud. The old recordings start to play over the new ones. I need a canvas." An idea began to form in Eleanor's mind, an idea born not of strategy, but of a kind of desperate, respectful penance. This wasn't about harnessing Ava's gift. It was about giving it a sanctuary. "I will build you a room," Eleanor said, the words surprising her with their certainty. "Not an office, a laboratory for your thoughts. You will design it. You will control everything that enters it. No one will have access without your permission. You will have no title, no quotas, no deliverables. Your only mission will be to follow the patterns wherever they lead." Ava finally turned from the wall, her dark eyes searching Eleanor's face in the dim light. She saw no hint of the transactional CEO from the restaurant. She saw a woman offering not a contract, but a key. "I would need it to be quiet," Ava whispered. "Soundproofed. No electronic devices that I don't install myself. And the walls, I want them to be whiteboards, all of them. Floor to ceiling." "Done," Eleanor said without hesitation. "We'll call it the Atlas Room." The Atlas Room became a legend within the upper echelons of Vance Global. It was a vast, circular chamber on a restricted sublevel of the headquarters, a sterile white sanctuary accessible by a single biometric scanner keyed only to Ava, Eleanor, and Lily. Inside, Ava worked, but it was not work as anyone understood it. She would stand for hours, sometimes days, in the center of the room, absorbing vast, complex data sets that were fed to a single, isolated terminal. Then she would begin to draw. Her medium was a set of dry erase markers in 100 different colors. She didn't write reports. She created murals of logic. She mapped the ebb and flow of global commodities, the tangled web of geopolitical tensions, the chaotic dance of weather systems and shipping lanes. Her work was a breathtaking fusion of art and analytics, intricate flowing diagrams that connected seemingly unrelated phenomena. She wasn't just processing data. She was revealing the hidden nervous system of the world. Her first major project was a full analysis of Vance Global's supply chain. Eleanor had expected a report on inefficiencies. What she got was a summons to the Atlas room. Ava showed her a sprawling, color-coded map that covered an entire wall. "Here," Ava said, pointing to a cluster of red lines converging on a series of textile mills in Southeast Asia. "This is your primary supplier for industrial canvas. The efficiency is perfect. The cost is the lowest on the market." "I know," Eleanor said. "It took us years to optimize that network." "You optimized for cost," Ava corrected softly. "You didn't see the other pattern." She drew a new set of lines in blue, connecting the mills to local labor reports, water toxicity levels, and satellite imagery, showing the disappearance of a small, protected mangrove forest downstream. "The human cost is unsustainable. The environmental cost is catastrophic. The pattern predicts a full-scale labor strike within 6 months and a government-led environmental shutdown within a year. Your perfectly efficient network is a time bomb." Eleanor stared at the diagram. Her own analysts had seen only numbers on a spreadsheet. Ava saw a story of impending collapse. That day, Eleanor made a decision that cost the company nearly $100 million in the short term, divesting from the supplier and rebuilding the network with ethical, sustainable partners. Her board thought she was insane. But 6 months later, when the strikes and the shutdown happened exactly as Ava had predicted, devastating their competitors, they understood. Eleanor had not just avoided a crisis, she had fundamentally changed the definition of risk and value for the entire company. The relationship between Eleanor and her daughter was also being redrawn. One evening, Lily showed her mother the preliminary designs for her application to architecture school. Eleanor's first instinct was to analyze them, to point out the structural inefficiencies, the logistical challenges of her ambitious cantilevers. She opened her mouth to speak, the old words of optimization on her tongue. But she stopped. She looked at the passion in Lily's eyes, the confident sweep of the lines on the page. She saw not a flawed logistical plan, but a beautiful idea about how human beings could live and interact with a space. "It's about the light, Mom," Lily explained, her voice full of an energy Eleanor hadn't heard in years. "It's not just about shelter. It's about how the morning sun feels when it hits this wall, how this hallway encourages people to slow down and talk instead of just rushing through. It's a pattern for living. A pattern for living." The words echoed in Eleanor's mind. She had spent her life creating patterns for moving boxes, for maximizing profit, for controlling outcomes. She had never once considered designing a pattern for happiness. "It's brilliant, Lily," Eleanor said, and the sincerity in her own voice was a revelation. "Tell me more about the light." A year to the day after the deposition, Eleanor found herself on the penthouse's rooftop garden. It was a space that had once been a sterile, minimalist showpiece. Now, it was a chaotic, thriving jungle, the result of Lily's design and Ava's surprising encyclopedic knowledge of botany. Lily was across the terrace, laughing as she tried to teach Frank Miller, the gruff old detective, how to prune a rose bush. Eleanor sat on a simple stone bench, watching the sunset paint the city in hues of gold and violet. Ava sat down beside her, holding a small, square piece of paper, a receipt from a coffee shop they had visited earlier. Her fingers began to move, folding and creasing the paper with practiced fluid motions. "I looked him up," Ava said quietly, her eyes on her work. Finch. Frank found him. He's living in a small rented room in Belgium. He spends his days in public libraries reading old newspapers. He doesn't speak to anyone. He is in a prison of his own making, Eleanor said. It was not a statement of triumph, but of fact. He tried to turn my mind into a library, Ava mused. A place to store old, dead facts. But that's not what a mind is for, is it? She made a final, deft fold. It's for building new things. She held out her hand. Resting in her palm was the coffee shop receipt, transformed into an exquisitely detailed, impossibly complex paper crane. Eleanor took it, feeling the crisp, delicate structure. It was a worthless scrap of paper, a record of a minor transaction that had been reshaped by a unique intelligence into an object of beauty and wonder. A small, perfect metaphor. You gave me the Atlas room, Eleanor, Ava said, her gaze turning to Lily, whose face was bright with laughter in the fading light. You gave me a place to map the world. But she, Ava nodded towards Lily, is teaching me how to live in it. Eleanor looked from the intricate paper bird in her hand to her joyful, confident daughter, to the quiet, formidable genius sitting beside her. She had spent a lifetime acquiring power, building an empire of steel and logistics, believing that value was something to be calculated on a balance sheet. But she saw now that her greatest assets were not on any corporate ledger. They were here, in this garden, in the messy, inefficient, unpredictable, and priceless patterns of human connection. The world was still a complex logistics problem, she realized, but she had finally learned to read the entire map, and it was so much more beautiful than she had ever imagined.